Welcome to episode 19 of the Filmumentaries podcast. This is Jamie Benning speaking to you from my house here in London. If you're new to the podcast, I hope you find this both interesting and rewarding. Essentially what I'm doing here is creating an archive of interviews with craftspeople in the film industry. Some of them are very much retired, while others are still actively working. The thing that links them all are those seminal movies of the 70s, 80s and 90s like Jaws, Star Wars, Indiana Jones, Back to the Future, Blade Runner. I didn't mention any 90s films there, but I'll be tackling some of those in upcoming episodes. Do go back and check out some of the previous episodes in which I've spoken to an Oscar-winning editor, an Oscar-winning sound designer, special effects supervisor, an actor, a stunt performer, several puppeteers, an industrial designer with some great stories about his time working on both Star Wars and Star Trek, as well as some hilarious ones about Howard the Duck. For this episode 19, I've returned to Jaws. If you don't already know my work, from 2006 to 2014, I created some feature-length documentaries, or filmumentaries as I called them, on some of my favourite films. These filmumentaries take the film timeline as you know it, but I masterfully edit in commentary, behind-the-scenes video, deleted scenes, text facts, animations, and so on to flesh out the story of the making of the movie. My intention was to create a new way to experience the making of a movie. I was fed up with those kind of bog-standard making-of documentaries. Inside Jaws is still available for free on Vimeo.com. In fact, all of my work is free, partly thanks to the very kind patrons on Patreon. More on that at the end of the podcast. So last weekend, here in February 2021, I spoke to the legendary production designer Joe Alves. Joe collaborated with Steven Spielberg on a number of projects, going back to Steven's years in television. But I spoke to him about the origins of his job in the industry, as well as his time on Jaws and Close Encounters. I should also note that Joe has a book called Joe Alves, Production Designer. It's written by Dennis L. Prince, with a foreword by effects artist Greg Nicotero. Thanks as always for your question suggestions. This time those thanks go to DG Adoy, Benjamin Cruz, though I did ignore your question, James H. Dargy, Ed Clark, Scott H., Newbie DM, and Tom Quinn. I didn't get a chance to ask all of them, but I appreciate you getting in touch and also by helping me to form my ideas ahead of the interview. So here's my chat with Joe Alves, production designer on Jaws and Close Encounters, and I'll be back at the end for a bit more jabbering on. Joe, can you tell me how you got started in the film industry? What was the origins of your journey and your career?
I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area, and I went to a college, San Jose State. When I was in high school, I played the piano, and I had a little combo, and and I could always draw. I was, from the time I was, 4 years old, and I think when I was in the fourth grade, I drew all the dwarfs, about this size. So when I was in high school, I was the head of the poster committee and I played piano. Then I went to college and I decided I wanted to do film. It was an interesting thing. I had seen American in Paris and with a little girl down the street, and we came home dancing away. And then I found out the movie wasn't made in Paris. It was actually made on the back lot. And it was an art directors that did this, And so I thought, boy, that's what I want to do. So I figured I needed to know architecture and art. So I majored in architecture, minored in drama. And I was in a play. And then there was a sign that kept saying Los Angeles, as I was driving to. And I said, someday I'm going to make that turn and go down to LA and get in the film business. I did, and I went to a very good art school, Chenard's, that specialized in production design. And so I was very young because I graduated, I just turned 17 a month. So all through my senior year, I was only 16. And so I'm in art school down there, and my cousin's an architect living down there, and he helps me out on architectural things. So the summer comes, and I don't want to move back to San Francisco. I want to stay in LA and get a job there for the summer. But when I was in college, I was in a fraternity, and one of my fraternity brothers, I went and I saw him. He says, well, my wife's father works at Disney. Maybe you can get a job at Disney's. And I thought, okay. So I called up, and it just happened. He was the guy that did the hiring. I mean, what luck. So he said, well, bring in your portfolio. I just turned 19. And I said, well, I thought I'd go sweep up or, work around the stages. He said, no, bring your portfolio. So I brought my portfolio in, and he said, yeah, good. He said, you're too late for the training program. Was 40 days they teach you how to do Mickey Mouse and stuff like that. He said, but I could put you in special effects right away, where you do fire and water and all those effects. So I go into this room, and there's this woman, Marion, I remember her name, and there's these tables with this glass thing, and paper with 3 holes in it, and you put it in there. And I said, well, what do I do? I mean, this is my trade, nothing. She said, you flip the pages and draw in between. So, okay, I'm a trainee. And you go from a trainee after about 40, 50 days to an in-betweener. And after a couple of years, you become a breakdown artist. And then another couple of years, you become an assistant animator. And then it goes on, you become an animator. Well, so she's working for Dwight Carlisle, who's an older assistant. And he's working for Josh Metter, who is the king. He did the Fire and Bambi. He did Night in Bald Mountain, all these things. And he was working on a picture for MGM called Forbidden Planet. And he was drawing the id. And so she was working for his assistant, and I'm doing whatever they give me. And then after a couple of weeks, she has to leave. So I start working directly with Dwight. So I go from a trainee to a breakdown artist within a month or two. It's just incredible. And I'm working with them, and we're starting to draw the id, and we're in a Techniscope paper, which is wide, big, because it was the format. And I'm working with Dwight, who's working for Josh. And a month into it, and Dwight's got to go to the hospital. So now I'm assisting Josh Metter. After a couple of months, I am drawing the id. And so that's how it started. And Josh was a great artist when he wasn't, he'd take breaks and go paint. He painted with his palette knife. So, and then after that, I was working on Sleeping Beauty. And this is an interesting sort of thing because of the state of the situation. That I'm drawing a cookie. One of the fairies is holding a cookie. This guy reaches over my table and he said, no, the cookie should look like this. Look more like Mickey Mouse's ears, And it was Walt Disney. And, and everybody, you called him Walt. I said, oh, okay, thank you, Walter. And so that was sort of, here I'm this kid, 19, and Walt Disney is correcting my drawings, And I had a couple of occasions to talk to Walt when the head animator said, well, take this up to the director and see, if they like it. And I did. And Walt would be there and said, let me have that. Oh, no, you do this. So that was my beginning of the movie business. And I was there for Jamie, for about 2 years, but I really wanted to get into live action. So I tried to get a job right away. But what happened was, in the meantime, I got a job with a very high level decorator in Beverly Hills. We're working on Liberace's house and all these. And he hired me to do illustrations. So I did that, and that helped me get the set kind of things. And I did that, but this friend of mine who actually directed me in a play in college, he went to the service for a couple of years. He came back, and he got a job at Disney, and he started directing plays at the Hollywood Playhouse. And so I did a lot of sets, theatrical sets. So I did the illustrations and the working drawings. Vincent Canby, we were doing The Big Knife. and we did a different kind of thing where we actually wanted to coordinate the movie and a play. So we had Marion, the wife of the character, Jack Palance played in the movie. We photographed her driving from Malibu to Beverly Hills. And then she walks into this door, and I matched the door, but we have a screen. And so we're watching this movie. And then as she comes to the door on the screen, the screen goes up and she comes through a matching door, and we're in the set for this little theater. Vincent Canby, he thought that was just incredible, and he wanted to talk to me. I said, the director wasn't, no, I want to talk to the designer. So he said, I like that idea. I'm going to steal it when I redo this play in Broadway. So here I am again, very, very fortunate. Anyway, long story short, if I could make it short, I find out from an art director how I get a job, and I have to start as a junior set designer. In those days, it was very specific. It was a studio system. And, there was head of production, head of all these departments, and head art director, and they would assign you what job you did. But so I'm going around as a junior set designer. You got to wait till everybody else is hired. And so Bob Kinoshita, he was doing a television show at a studio called Ziv, and he was doing Man in Space. And I started working with him as a set designer until that finished. And then I got a job at 20th Century Fox, who was doing On the Terrace. And so you're hired, you're the last one to hire, first one to be fired until your seniority. And then I went to MGM. I worked on Mutiny on the Bounty, The Boat, that Marlon Brando did. And then that was through. I went to Warner Brothers, worked on Ocean's 11, My Fair Lady, and it was just incredible. Anyway, finally, I became a senior, and that's when I was at Universal. And then from that, I worked on the, God, there's so many movies. But in any case, then I worked myself up as a senior. Eventually, I got a job as an assistant art director, and that got me into that position.
Wow. What a journey. I mean, some of those films you mentioned there, such iconic films. You obviously were born at the right time, Joe. You were lucky, that studio system was still in existence then. There was a proper ladder to climb, unlike today. So when did you, I know you worked with Steven Spielberg on Sugarland Express, but when did you first meet Steven?
Probably my biggest break as an art director, as an assistant, and then I became an art director on Night Gallery, Rod Serling's Night Gallery. And Steven did a Night Gallery. And then when that season was over, we did a show called The Psychiatrist. They only lasted 6 episodes, but Steven did 2. And we got to know each other. Now, Steven was very, very clever, but he was not familiar with the studio system and who did what. And I remember one time he had a crowd of people, extras, and he was saying, "Oh, say this," and the production managers are going crazy because every time somebody said a word, that put their rate to 3 times more.
Right. Yeah.
And so Stephen wasn't familiar with the procedure. Anyway, I went on to do Night Gallery, and then he did some television movies, and then he got this movie with Goldie Hawn, Sugarland Express. And so then the heads of the department said, well, Joe's worked with this young guy, put them together. So that's the way it was. Jaws was a different thing. So I got a good relationship with Steven, but on a very small, low-budget movie where 2 big producers, Zanuck and Brown, and Dick Zanuck and David Brown, and they had done Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid, The Sting. So I got to know Dick Zanuck pretty well because on Sugarland, we drove for miles, to find locations in Texas. Things were quite different before CGI. I mean, we did that movie, and then I'm working on a television movie, and I get a call from David Brown, which was pretty unusual because I'm sort of like a new art director, and this guy's big. I mean, his wife was Helen Gurley Brown, who was an editor of Cosmopolitan magazine, and she got the galley sheets of a book called Jaws, and she knew Peter Benchley. She knew the Benchley family, and so David called me, and he said, I want to try to. She told David, I think this will make a good movie. So he called me. He said, Joe, for me to sell this to the studio, it would be helpful if you could make me some storyboards, sketches. They're in the book, the big charcoal sketches, which was sort of unusual. And basically, you're supposed to. Art director could do a few sketches, illustrations, and if you're going to do a lot, then you need to hire an illustrator. That's a different union. But he said he didn't have a charge number, so he couldn't pay. I mean, I guess they didn't want to pay out of their own money. So I went to the head of the art department, and he said, fine, if it's for Zanuck and Brown, but just keep doing your other work too, So in between checking the sets for the Double Indemnity, I think was the movie, and I would start doing these illustrations. So I would go over to Steven. I said, this shark movie is going to be great. He says, I wanted to do a pirate movie or something, which he did later. And in any case, what happened, and I'll try to make this quick, I did about 30 illustrations. And Steven, then Zanuck and Brown, they had another guy first. And he kept calling the shark a whale. And they said, "No, we don't want to. No, this is a shark, not a whale. It's not Moby Dick." So eventually they brought Steven on. And there was a big meeting in Marshall Green, who was the head of production. In that meeting, there was Zanuck and Brown and Steven, and then the various department heads, head of art department, editing, camera, and special effects. So after I did my big display, and the shark does this, and Steven and I decided if we're going to do this, we're going to do a big shark, like 25 feet, in the real ocean, not in, because we watched some of these movies and they did it in the back lot in the lake with a phony backdrop. Real ocean, big shark, no miniature. So I explained that to the effects department, because Marshall said, okay, what do you guys, and they said, oh, we can't do it. It's going to take a year and a half. No one's ever done a big thing like that in the real ocean. And besides, we have bigger movies like the Hindenburg, and Marshall got a little upset because Marshall lived on a boat. So I think he liked this idea. And he said, Jaws could be a bigger movie than the Hindenburg. And people laughed. Of course it wasn't. Hindenburg was a big movie, Anyway, basically, we're wrapping up the meeting. I'm getting my drawings in my portfolio. And I start to walk out, and Marshall calls me back, and he says, can you get the shark made? Which normally is not an art director's job. Just get it made, but take it away from the studio. Do it independently. Find some people to make it. So he gave me total autonomy to go make the shark, which is sort of unusual. So basically, that's how that started. And I started researching sharks. And then I hired a number of people. I went to Walt Disney and I said, could you make the shark? And they said, yes, because they made a whale, but we won't take it in the ocean. I said, that's not going to work. And then Joe Lombardi, who did the Godfather movies, he was pretty high up there. And he says, Joe, this will take a good year and a half to make. And I got some other projects I can't do. Eventually, I found Bob Matty, who was sort of retired, who had done the giant squid in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And Bob was incredible. And in the book, you see a little wire thing that he made. And he said, let me think about it. He came back a couple of days with this wire sculpture. You pull the thing, the mouth opens. And he says, that's basically it. We'll control it with valves, and we'll, and we'll use hydraulics, not pneumatics, because in the ocean you don't break and then you have oil all over. So anyway, basically that was it. And then we got a team, Roy Arbogast, who was really very into the new plastics and stuff, and a few other guys. And then I got an ichthyologist, Leonard Campagno from Steinhardt Institute, and we worked together. I did a sculpture, which is in the book, about 4 feet. And we made it 6 times that. And so that's basically how Jaws started.
All of that idea about how to do it in the ocean and to do it as a physical full size prop, not a miniature, was also dependent on finding a location that you could do it in, right? Was that part of your job as well, Joe? Because I know you scouted the location obviously for Amity, but was the location for the shark also down to you?
I had a map of the area because I met with Peter Benchley. And I asked him where he wrote this for. And he says, Stony, Dunside Harbor, various places, but nothing specific. And as I said, well, he says, go to Nantucket and you meet my parents and blah, blah, blah. That's great. So I said, what about this other island, Martha's Vineyard? And he said, no, he'd never been there, but he didn't think there was anything. Anyway, long story short, I started to go to Nantucket. The water was too rough. The boat turned around, and there was a boat to Martha's Vineyard, and that's how I happened to go to Martha's Vineyard. Now, I was here's the thing. We had 2 sharks, one that went left to right, and there was towed 300 feet. Then we had one that was on a platform that Bob had barrels, and it would sink, and it had a track on it, and it had this arm that came up, and so the shark we could really pinpoint where it goes. The others were just drive-bys. But I needed 25 feet of depth. So the thing, the shark would come up. And I needed a low tide, because if the tide was too big, we would see all the mechanics or we wouldn't see the shark. And in the West Coast, the tides were like 12 feet. When I got to Martha's Vineyard and I saw Edgartown and Menemsha, I saw this bay, and I checked it out. It was 25 feet, and the tide was 2 feet.
Wow.
And I said,
perfect.
This is it. It's perfect. Well, I thought it was perfect, and our problem was this, that we started working on the shark, probably, the meeting was in October of 73. Putting the guys together and get a place to build it outside the lot. It was probably mid-November, late November, when we started putting the thing together and making this big sculpture. December 17th, Matt found it in his book, exactly when I went there. I went to Martha's Vineyard. And so that was all good until February of 74, and the book came out. And then the studio said, we got to start shooting this in 2 months. And there lies the problem. The guys had 4 or 5 months before we started to shoot the shark, when we didn't have the year and a half.
Yeah. But your responsibility is, not only have you got these broad things like where we're going to shoot it, how the shark's going to look, your job is to kind of, well, wasn't it Rod Serling said, I write the words, you make them happen. I mean, that's what your job is, isn't it? You make those words happen. And that set of Quint's shack there, Carl Gottlieb called it a masterpiece of a set, that smelt of blood and bone. And it tells so much about that character. As soon as we see him sitting there in front of that blackboard, we're kind of, who is this guy? Is he the real deal? And then we see his shack, and we know he's the real deal because of all of that amazing set decoration you did. Where do you begin to dress a set like that and decide how that set's going to look?
Well, this is great. John Dwyer was a set decorator, and I worked with John on many night galleries. It's really old-time set decorating. Most of the time, I work with set decorators. Some of them are just skimpy. They just others put so much that you go in and you take stuff out. which I like better because then you got more choices. John really loaded it up. I mean, he found more shark heads, more, and teeth and stuff, and he was great. So the what I wanted, and I got a little trouble for it because when I saw Menemsha, and I'll never forget, I thought, my God, David Lean would have built this whole peninsula, because it had all these little fishing shacks. But then right at the very, both sides, right at the end, there was an empty lot. And I thought, perfect for Quint. And I'm going to make it bigger, because that's Quint. All these other fishermen are little guys. He's the master. So I had a lot of problems. I had to make a model, which I made a lot of models, and take it to Boston and get a permit to build it. And then the selectmen, there's all these selectmen in Martha's Vineyard, and they said, "Oh, you're making it too high. There's a restriction of size." I said, "Well, it's not a real building. It's a set. We're going to shoot it, and then we could tear it down." And they said, "Okay." We had to put a $500,000 bond that we would tear it down, and that's a lot of money.
Wow.
I mean, the movie budget is like $4 million. They're talking about $500,000. Anyway, I'm all ready to build it, and I've got a big like telephone pole thing, it's going into the water, and a guy comes in, he stops, he says, "You got to stop. You can't put that in the water." I said, "Why?" "Well, that's a violation of that. You need a different permit." And I said, "Well, what's going to happen?" He says, "Well, they're going to make you take it out." I said, "Well, how long is that going to take?" "Oh, probably about 6 months after." I said, "Okay, fine, screw it." Put the poles down. So it just kept going like that.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
an interesting thing, while I was doing that, there was this guy, Lynn Murphy, a fisherman with a lot of attitude and a voice, "Rah, rah, rah, rah. You guys are wrecking the thing, blah, blah, blah." I said, "You're a fisherman here, a boat guy?" "Yeah." I said, "We need a guy local that could tow the shark, that knows all the waters." "Yeah? Yeah. Why don't you go talk to production manager?" So that was Lynn Murphy, and he had a young girl who eventually married, Susan Murphy, and he would boss her around. "Get that rope, do it." Well, Robert Shaw met him, and they go drinking together, and that was the character that he stole. He stole the voice and the attitude from a guy that was at Martha's Vineyard, Lynn Murphy. It's just crazy,
Yeah, that's great. Did you ever go for a drink with Robert Shaw?
No.
Or you're too sensible not to?
Well, yeah, no. I met a very pretty young girl, and I spent whatever time I wasn't working on the set with her.
Yeah.
She was the one that pointed, "Shark in the estuary, shark in the estuary."
Oh, really?
Very
All
cute
right.
girl. Yeah,
Yeah,
we
she
went
was
together
cute,
for
yeah.
a number of years. She was much younger than me, but
But you were on set. You were on location there every day for that whole production that overran and went on and on.
What happened was this. So we didn't have the shark working, and what really was stopping the shark from working a lot was the salt water, was getting into the electrolytes. So I would sit on lunchtime with Stephen, and we'd go through the whole script, and I started doing the storyboards. There again, they're supposed to hire an illustrator, but they're too cheap. Joe can do it, which was good because they couldn't pay me. They didn't claim who did it, so I kept all those storyboards. Because the studio used to just get all that stuff, and they used to throw it away too.
Yeah,
they
yeah.
burn stuff. Now everybody.
Thank goodness you did it and kept hold of it.
Yeah. So basically, I would go. We would shoot everything we could without the shark, and I have to explain this to critics. We got every shot that we wanted with the shark. When people say, "Oh, they didn't use the shark enough because it didn't work," if you look at the storyboards, every shark that's there, we got. The barrels. Oh, they used the barrels because the shark did. No. The barrels were a Hitchcock thing. when the barrels come in, it goes down. You know why it goes down, because the shark's there. So it was Stephen directing, very clever. It's like Chrissy gets eaten, boom, and then she gets pulled. You don't see the shark. Why? There's when the wharf goes and turns around and comes at them. Why? Because the shark's there. So he wanted the shark to come up when Scheider was coming from this stuff, and we need a bigger boat. So it all in all, it worked out quite well. We got back to the studio. I shot the last day. There was a sequence. Stephen wanted to really get back and work with Verna Fields and cut the thing. And there was a shot with the raft, a kid on the raft, and the shark grabs the raft.
You did that shot? Oh, wow. That shot has haunted me all my life, Joe.
That was my first directing gig.
Yeah. No, that's a hell of a shot.
Directing a lot on second unit on Jaws too. But when we got back, we did, in the backlight, we did the shot where Dreyfuss goes down and he finds the tooth, and then the guy, you see the guy in the hole of the head of Gardner's head. So that was done on the back lot, and it was all foggy at night, so that was cool. And we did a couple other shots. But Stephen, they had a screening, sneak screening in, I think it was Texas. It was just the executives and Stephen. And Stephen came back and he said, Joe, I've got 4 screams. I think I could get 5 if I can get the head in the hole to come out more. And well, we were stopped shooting. There was no money, no for it. I said, okay, because I like to build things, So I said, I'll build the hull. And I built a hull with a hole in it. And he got somebody to sneak out the head from the makeup department. He got an underwater cameraman. And so we had that. And he says, I want another shot of the hull breaking as the shark is going to show me the way to go. Boom, boom, boom. I want to see water splitting, breaking thing. So I did that. We did that in my driveway with a hose and Stephen. So as big as this movie was, we got Stephen with a hose and the camera and in my driveway. And then we took the one with the hole to Verna's swimming pool. I didn't have a swimming pool built yet. And so Verna's pool, we clouded up the water and we did that shot. And then we had dailies in the studio. We flipped out Santa Cabral. There's no Jaws dailies. We're finished. Well, not quite.
We've got some more, yeah.
Stephen and I are working for nothing. We didn't get paid to do this. But we were, it was like the crew was really tired being on that boat for so long. And the studio, because Stephen, just when we started shooting the water sequence, when I scouted it, the basic water area and the beach was covered with snow and there was nobody out there. But now in June, July, there's people and there's boats coming all over the place. And Stephen wanted them to be isolated with no boats. And he was very firm about that. Quint breaks the radio and there's just 3 guys and a shark, nobody else. So he was very firm. And the studio, how come he's not shooting? Yeah, he's not shooting. And we used to get boats, send boats, go this way, go that way. Some people would cooperate. Okay. Other people say, screw you. I'm going to be where I want. Anyway, it took forever. Not only the shark not working all the time, but not having a clear ocean view. And, there were thought about getting rid of Stephen, it was like, but he was so strong, even at 27, 28 years old, of getting what he thought was right. And I admire him for that. And we had a strong relationship with that. And Verna Fields was very strong about it. Verna helped me a lot. Verna actually was cutting the movie with my storyboards there. I've never seen an editor do that. And we're working with Ron and Valerie Taylor, who did Blue Water, White Death. And there's a thing in the book where I'm talking to Verna and the Taylors about how the shark moves. And Valerie said, Joe, you're moving the tail too much. Just let it swim. Okay. So we were working on how a real shark moved. I had a real ichthyologist help me with the model, so we got it down. So when people say, "Oh," we really had, so there was a group of people. Bill Gilmore, who was a production manager, he came aboard, and we had to let the first one go. And with Bill and a few people, we fought through it because the studio was saying, well, maybe we should go someplace else and shoot the water. Maybe we should do this. And actually Dick Zanuck was great too, because I had all the storyboards on a big wall in the production office. And when we get a shark shot, he would cross it off. And that was his big thing, coming with a red marker. So he would tell the studio, he would lie. He'd say, oh yeah, we got so many shots, which we didn't, but it inched along. And as I say, we got back. We were not heroes. They threw the sharks in the back lot and let them rot. They sold the boat. Eventually, they had to buy it back for the tour. And just last year, some executive destroyed the boat. Just said, oh, get rid of that old thing. And Stephen, what I've heard, even in recent years when he was at Universal, would go there and sit by the boat and just think about his career and relate to the boat. And then some executive just, oh, we don't need that old boat.
It's crazy, isn't it? These things are important, and clearly important to Stephen to kind of sit there and reflect on what was a really difficult time for him, and maybe it sort of roots him back to those months.
Yeah, and it was interesting because we hadn't seen each other for a long time. And a year ago, February, the Art Directors Guild gave me a Lifetime Achievement Award.
Yeah, congratulations.
And so the studio said, oh, maybe who's going to introduce you? And I said, well, most of them were dead. Bill Gilmore's dead. So many people, Verna Field's dead. What about Stephen? I said, oh, Stephen's doing, the show in New York, West Side Story. I wouldn't want to bother him. So Greg Nicotero, we were doing book signing, and Greg did the forward to this. And Greg said, oh, I'll be happy to introduce you. So this, I got to tell you, Jamie, so we're at 1,000 people, it's a black tie, all this stuff. And Greg's talking, he's going to introduce me, and we've been friends for years, and he's a big collector of Jaws stuff. And then they were starting to show a screening of my various movies. And then Spielberg appears. And he did this video saying how great it was working with me, what a terribly hard time we had on Jaws, and a great time with Close Encounters. Still, he said Close Encounters, still the biggest set he's ever worked on, blah, blah, blah. And I love you, Joe. And so that blew me away,
Fantastic. Yeah.
And I think he is so successful, and he's been doing it for so long. I think he reflects back. I did his first television and his first 3 movies and stuff. So that was very rewarding, Jamie, to have that.
Yeah, I bet. And yeah, being around in those formative years with Stephen. One thing I wanted to say to you, I'm here in London, right? And I first saw Jaws when I shouldn't have been watching it. It was on TV here in the UK. I found out the other day, I had a little look back. It premiered on the 8th of October, 1981. Of the 56 million people in the UK, 23.3 million watched it that night on TV.
Are you serious?
Yeah, half the population of the country I live in watched that movie. It's got to be one of the biggest TV events ever to have occurred in the UK, I would think. Crazy. But that's the reach that film has, So we've reached the halfway point, roughly here. I'll be back chatting with Joe Alves after these messages.
Here's what some people are saying about the Projection Booth podcast.
The Projection Booth is single-handedly the greatest film podcast you could ever listen to or could possibly want.
Top notch. 5 stars. This has quickly become one of my favorite film-related podcasts. Always interesting.
A completely unpretentious yet fully comprehensive look at films from all genres.
The Projection Booth podcast, with new episodes available every week at projectionboothpodcast.com.
It was amazing because for the last century, I would hear people talk about Jaws and stuff. And then we did a thing in Martha's Vineyard, probably 2002 or something like that. We had various people there, and Jim Beller and something. They said, "Oh, you should sell some of your storyboards. These guys that I sell." And I said, "Really? People are interested?" "Oh yeah, are you kidding?" So I sold some for 20, some for 50 if I did a real like this. I do a real shark original. Anyway, but it just increased. Then I started doing these shows, in various places, and of course, this last year I get almost every day. Would you sign this? Would you do that? And last week, a guy brought 150 things for me to sign. There's
a day's work.
Little cartoon shark. It comes in a package, and I sign the plastic thing. And so these people sell it. So I made money off of that. The day before, there's this guy, I guess very wealthy, wants to do something on Jaws. And Chris Marr, who's the sculptor, who did a lifetime quint that we had for Greg Nicotero's company, and he did the 3 characters for the Catalina Island. So anyway, he's involved with this guy, and he got the chalkboard, big chalkboard. And the guy wanted me to draw the original, shark on the top.
Was that you that drew that originally then on the board?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
Well, I did an earlier one, and then we could see that it was being erased. Steven said, "No, I want something more simplistic, because mine was a shark coming at you. This one is just, a profile with a little character in it." So anyway, the last week was that and signing, and I'm thinking it must be the pandemic that people have nothing else to do,
I don't know about that. I think it's, it's one of those films that's going to live on and on and on. Are you okay to talk about Close Encounters a bit as well, Joe? Is that okay? Yeah. So with Jaws, you worked in like a real town and you worked in open water. For Close Encounters of the Third Kind, you worked in a more controlled studio environment. Do you think Stephen did that because of his experiences on Jaws, or was it purely because the script called for it? The scope of the script, if you like.
Steve and I, where he was cutting Jaws, we took a break and we went skiing. And I had a condo up in Mammoth Ski Lodge. And we got snowed in. And he was going to do Bingo Long and the Traveling All-Stars about black baseball in the 30s. So I brought a bunch of research to talk about that, Life magazines of the period and stuff. And he started talking about this script he's writing called Watch the Sky. And Dr. Alan Hynek's book, UFO Scientific Inquiry, about UFOs. And he started saying this and that. And I said, boy, that sounds more interesting than this black baseball movie. He said, yeah, but I don't have a deal. I said, okay, well, a couple of weeks later, I get a call from John Badham, who's a director I've worked with quite a bit on Night Gallery and a couple of movies. And John said, I got this movie I'm going to do called Bingo Long and his Traveling All-Stars. Oh, well, I guess Steven's not doing it, In any case, I had committed to do a thing called Embryo with Rock Hudson, small movie. But so I was doing Embryo. And then Stephen, after I finished that, Stephen called me and he said, we got a deal with Columbia with Julia and Michael Phillips, who are the producers. And they did The Sting. So they had some clout to get this thing done. So basically, he said, go talk to John Veach, who's the head of production at Columbia, and he'll tell you what's happening. So here again, I'm starting on a movie. Nobody else is on it. Stephen is. He's working on the script. And Julia, but nobody is physically doing, going on. And John says, look, we're going to shoot all this on a studio soundstage and on the back lot here. So it's all controlled. See, except we need one location, a weird mountain. So I got a map of scenic USA, and they had Ship Rock, Chimney Rock, all these various rocks. National Monument, the back of that where they have the president's heads. And Carl Gottlieb, I remember Verna Fields became, she was older. She went from editor, won the Academy Award. She became an executive vice president of Universal. She had an office, and then she had a spare office, which guys would go hang out, people that knew her. So I would go there sometimes, just read a script or break it down. And Carl, and I had my map, and I was looking at this, and Carl said, look at the Devil's Tower is pretty interesting, I think. He said, you should try that. So I drove 3,000 miles. And I mentioned at my award dinner thing, I said to the art directors, I said, today you just Google it. I mean, you could just show me mountains, Clary, show me strange mountains, But in those days, you drove. And I didn't have anybody hired. There's no location manager yet. I just drove and Shiprock was good. But then I got to Gillette, Wyoming, and I started driving, and I see, go over this hill, and I see this little triangle thing, and not triangle, but a little peak. And it disappears, then it gets bigger, and then I get there, and it's incredible. I mean, it was like a spacey looking thing. And I had taken pictures, pan shots, with camera and film, and you glue them all together. And I showed Stephen, even though I knew that was best, you still want to give the director options, So I said, here's Shiprock, here's, he's Devil's Tower by far,
And would you have photographed that from different locations around it to show him what the range of shots he could get were? And you took notes and everything? And
yeah. When you scout, you do pretty much pan shots, of the whole area and some detail shots. And then this is what's interesting. I scouted for Close Encounters in India for some strange looking things. But you don't know what you got until you come home. So you come back home with a sack full of film, then you got to wait days till they develop it. And then you hope like hell that it worked. Where today you go click, oh, that looks good. Oh, no, I don't like that. It's such a different world, I mean, no cell phones. I mean, So anyway, we get back, and Season loves that. And now in the script, what he has is that strange mountains here. And then he has just the military, like a military encampment with just tents and stuff. And then the spaceship comes down there. And we're talking, and I said, this spaceship comes down, it's all very technical stuff. We really should have technical equipment there to read what's. And he says, yeah. I said, what about if I build an arena, And he says, yeah, that would be cool. Okay. So I built an arena because John V says you could have stage 15 and 16, two biggest stages that connect, and where they shot Camelot. And so that would be like a big deal. So I make a model and to fit in that size of the stage. And now Jaws has come out. Now, this is a big thing because they've got the director of now this big successful movie, and we're making this small little sci-fi movie, and Columbia is having financial problems. There is some kind of Beagleman is doing some corrupt stuff. So they want a big movie, and now they got this young director that made a big movie. So they all come to look at my model. It's going to fit on stage 15, 16. And I showed it to them. They said, oh, I was in the spaceship. And they said, you got a problem with it? I said, well, yeah, I think it should be 4 times that big. Really? I said, yeah, because, it's such an important event. I mean, just think about it. Francois Truffaut was going all over finding these things. And finally they come to this area, and it's this big arena, And the arena had to be done inside because Doug Trumbull is coming on to do the effects, and he had done 2001, movie. High level guy, and it all had to be covered with black so he could control the lighting. So I make a model 4 times, And I show it to the executives again and the producer, and they said, "Oh, this is great," because now a little golf cart is just a little thing. I have no cars for size. I just want big, important, an important event. When Linda Dillon and Dreyfus walks over that hill, and incidentally, that hill that they walk over today would be green screen, like what's behind you. No, I built a mountain, 7 stories on rollers, that we could use in front of a 125-foot projection screen. And so that's what they wrote. I mean, it just
because I didn't even realize that road was a set. For years.
The road that he goes up.
Yeah,
that was
I had no idea.
Too. Okay, that was in the sex states. Anyway, so Clark Palo is now the production manager. Really super nice guy. So Clark and I, okay, where are you going to shoot this? And I don't have a clue. Shoot. Okay, it's so big. How about airplane hangars from World War II? So I go up to Oregon, big hangars, but half of it is being used by a lumber company. Saws going, oh, that's not going to. I go to North Carolina for another one, and up to Wyoming for another one, and they cheat the size. No, that's not big enough. And then somebody tells me about this thing in Mobile, Alabama, 2 hangars that they're not using. And I go there with Clark, and they're big, but they're 300-foot square and side by side, but the door opens up all the way. I said, okay, I could add another 150 feet to that. I mean, it's unbelievable with scaffolding and all that stuff. So that's where we decide to do it. And then the next stage is where I built the road that they could drive through one door and out the door at 45 miles an hour. So basically, that's how Close Encounters started, with the size and the scope. And then we shot a lot of other stuff in Mobile, Alabama, because it was supposed to look like Ohio. And Stephen said, well, we could go back home and shoot all the Neary house stuff. I said, well, no, LA stuff all has fences. This, we don't want a fence because he's doing barbecue and you can see the neighbors down here. And when he goes crazy, then everybody's looking. So you need an open thing. So basically, this is funny. So I found this area in Mobile, Alabama, where they were building these new houses. It was all open. So we found the house we wanted. And but nobody owned it. It was a company thing. And so Clark and I said, okay, well, we'll buy it and rent it to the studio. And then the studio said, because they wouldn't buy it. And then they said, wait a minute, you guys are going to buy it? Well, if you're going to buy it, then we're going to buy it. They bought it and then they sold it. And there was Close Encounters is quite interesting. Being English, you might have when we were, because George Lucas came on the set and he said, oh my God, we never built anything like this. We just built the set and repainted it for Star Wars. So I was up for the Academy Award against Star Wars, who were 2 English designers, and they won the Academy Award. And now I'm up for the BAFTA, for the British Academy Award, against the 2 English, and I won. And it was just funny. It's not that their work, it was this. It was that there was a lot of visual effects in Star Wars. And I think people got that confused with the production design,
Yeah. I think when you see Star Wars, you kind of understand that it's an invented universe. Whereas when you watch Close Encounters, you think it's Earth, therefore there is no design. But the fact is, there's so much design gone into it, so much thought gone into it. I mean, I can't even imagine how you would begin to break down a script like that on Close Encounters from a production design point of view. I mean, you must have an amazing mind. Like you said, we can't have fences because there's that scene. You must have to know the script kind of inside out.
Oh, yeah. Well, as you could see on this book, on Jaws, they're page by page, that I go through. And you go through, I don't know where that section is.
Yeah, right near at the back, isn't it, I think? Yeah.
Yeah, all this. And I didn't know why Dennis was going to put it, because he didn't put it in the first book. But when you go through it, this is how a designer, I know today they do it on a computer, but for example, I'm just reading the script, and then you see I made a few little sketches there, little thoughts. Those are thoughts. So when you're breaking it down from a visual point of view, you say, oh, this is, maybe make a little note, but let me just say, from having done night gallery, where I used to have to do sometimes 20 sets a week, you'd find stuff on the lot and you'd find doors and stuff. So you're just thinking all the time visually, after work, I'd go have a drink and I'm thinking, let's see, I need a big staircase there. I think there's one on such, and then you make a note. But with this, of course, we had to pretty well build everything, and so I had a great Bill Parks. He was an old Seabee in World War II, and he was a great commander. He always called me Mr. Alves. He smoked a pipe, and I mean, it is amazing. And then the mothership that comes down. Now, Trumbull did the animated one, but we built one, 80 feet, mirrored Mylar, and then it was really interesting. If you look, I hired an incredible illustrator, George Jensen, and I wish I had that book here. The illustrations reflected so much how Vilmos was going to light it, and so when the spaceship come down and like 3,000 photo floods hit the mirror, and then the kids come down and the smoke. It was a lot of thought, in that to do it, execution, and we were there for quite a while.
Light is crucial to the whole look of that film, isn't it? From Trumbull's special effects to your on-set stuff. How did you sort of approach that use of light sources in that scene in particular? Obviously, we're now all familiar with that kind of iconic look of the beams of light coming out.
Well, it was interesting, and we have 48 arcs. In the hangar, there was an area up above where we could have. We needed an electrician for each arc. When George did the illustrations, he really captured that mood, and then I think once, because Vilmos had a hard time. Vilmos was not a lighting cameraman. He was pretty much a location guy, really good with reflectors and stuff. But now suddenly and the first day or two of shooting, it was like black. It was just, and he was learning and developing, and of course George's illustrations, and it was shown to Stephen. I said, "This is the light effect," and it was interesting because after that, a lot of backlight was used, in movies. Where you just flood it back here, so you're working with shadows and light and reflection. It was quite an experience, and Vilmos won the Academy Award for it. Yeah. Stephen we were in my office. I said, Stephen, I got an idea about the mothership. He said, okay. So I put on the music to Space Odyssey, turn the lights off. I got my desk lamp, and I set it down. And I said, the mothership comes down, and then it starts to lift up. And you see this surgical slit of light. And that's important, surgical slit of light. Now, that means when I do this, that's got to be straight. It can't be wood. I had to make that out of metal because I had two metal things, 80 feet long. And when I did that, it showed him the light, the thing comes up and it's all dark. And then you see this. He said, okay, that's great. How are we going to do it? I said, well, we'll figure that out next. But, we needed a lot of light, and we needed it to come down in two pieces. So we had two cranes, one crane to lower the whole thing, and then another crane to raise this one. So Rory Arbogast was the head of visual effects on that movie. He did all the skins and stuff for the first Jaws. Anyway, yeah, that's how that came about.
I was just thinking that, there's something in you and in Stephen that drives you forward, that motivates you forward. Because each time you're doing something, you're doing it for the first time. In some ways, it's sort of reminding me of the script of Close Encounters. It's like this irrational faith that he's going to get to this point, where he's going to get the answers. And, coming up with an idea as simple as your desk lamp idea, but then having to create, an 80-foot wide metal structure to achieve that. I mean, how do you stay motivated in that situation and confident that you're going to reach that goal?
Interesting. I had a young couple write me, they generally, would you sign this? But they said, what's your greatest memory, and then what is your advice? Well, great memory, I had a lot of great memories, but probably the first biggest one was our second screening of Jaws, where I thought everybody was going to laugh at the shark, and they screamed, and then the executives, they went in the bathroom and they said, we got to make this a big release. And I'll never forget that moment. And as far as advice, I say, don't give up on your ideas. Be persistent. And I guess I had a reputation for being a little bit of hard-nosed, we've got to do it. I think that was all going back to Night Gallery. When I was a staff art director, some guys would do, weekly television shows where they did a minimum amount of work. They'd get to work, they'd check the set, they'd do a thing, go have their coffee, and go back and read the paper, until they had to go check the set again. When I had got Night Gallery, and I worked for some pretty good art directors too. That I worked for Frank Arrigo, he used to be a boxer, and he was a persistent guy. He was like, we're going to do it. I did a thing with him, Alfred Hitchcock, Torn Curtain, and working with Hitch was, you really had to be on top of it. And Hitch was an art director in England before he became a director. And so with Hitch, you better do it, and you do it right. And Hitchcock said one time, he called me up, he says, I want you to do this. Mr. Newman comes, runs down the stairs, he goes over to the registration desk and leaves. And I said, okay, Mr. Hitchcock. Some people call him Hitch. I call him Mr. Hitchcock. And I said, okay, but what about the reverse shot? Or what about this? No. He comes to the desk and he leaves. So you build just that. And so with Frank also had directed stuff at a smaller television before he went back to art directing, is you build what you need, and you build it as good as detailed as possible. You don't put 4 bad walls, you put 2 good walls if that's all you got. And that's what I learned with Night Gallery, is give them, this is what you're going to shoot, make it as much quality as a feature, So Frank sort of taught me about being steadfast. I know we're a little over budget, but we got to do it, and it's going to be great, and blah blah blah. Some people just back off. Oh, you don't want that? Oh, okay. Here's a wall. It's green, whatever. So I think I learned a lot from Frank, because he taught me how to be a production designer as a director would think. Think of what the script says, what the shot needs. Just don't build all the stuff that you never see. Some directors will never tell you what they want. They just want to come in and you build all this stuff, and then you don't see half of it. It's a waste of money. The idea that if you could do storyboards and you could say, this is what we're going to shoot, and the director agrees, and that's what was Stephen, Stephen would shoot, he'd vary a little bit, he could do stuff, but yeah, steadfast.
and bloody mindedness. Yeah, just keep going, keep pushing. I'm aware that I've gone over the hour here. Just got one more question for you, Joe, if that's cool. When people think of Jaws, they draw the shark, right? When people think of Close Encounters, they draw Devil's Tower, or they think of the light board. Now, you had a big involvement in coming up with, the stadium for a start. So didn't Spielberg want it to land between 2 fast food restaurants or something, and then you came up with the stadium idea, and then you come up with a light board as well? I mean, these things are so iconic, Joe. How do you come up with it?
The spaceship landed between McDonald's and Jack in the Box. And he had the idea for a short time. I said, okay, I'll make a model of a Jack in the Box and a thing, and and then he goes, nah, forget it. The light board, because I played piano, so I wanted music and sound. Okay, so you don't go in the piano 8 notes. No, you go the full 12. So you go C, C sharp, E, D, D sharp. So that's 12 units. Okay, so I put 12 little boxes, rectangles kind of thing. Now, all right, so that's it. That's middle C, over here. Goes over to B flat, which is right, and that covers all my boxes. Now that's a normal sound. But now if you want to go high, so then you go lighter, you go darker. So then I had this incredible board with 72 wires, so you could play it on the piano. You want a C major, so bum 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 bum. So I did all that. Except when Trumbull got a hold of it, then he just did it the way he wanted to do it. So you sometimes do these things with great effort and you could play it, but then he thought he would just do it electronically, visually with whatever CGI they had at the time. I know one guy came when I was building the big set. He said, "Oh, you don't have to build this. We'll do it in CGI." I said, "What's CGI?" "Oh, it's this, electric, blah, blah, blah." But it took 72 hours to make one shot, So that was a bad idea at that time. So I had a good and not so good relationship with Trumbull because as he got more important, as we wrapped, he took over a little bit more. And to the point that they actually did a special edition of Close Encounters. And Stephen released that, and then he didn't like it. It was overdone. I mean, I know. Here's what I didn't like what Trumbull did. When Dreyfus goes into the spaceship and it closes up, and the little boy says goodbye, it's goodbye. But no, he had to go in, and then you see all these creatures hanging, and I thought, why? And I think Stephen realized you took the mystery away. What are you going to do? And it reminded me of a hotel in Atlanta that you walk in the lobby and you see all the various balconies, and that's what it looked like, balconies with these little weird people looking down. So I was a little unhappy with that. And then Stephen, changed it. And it got a little rough with Vilmos and Stephen towards the end. And Trumbull did have a lot more influence, and it went off in a different direction for a while. But then it came back because I think that Indian is so good with the little boy, waving goodbye.
I agree. And also it gives the audience something to talk about. Like, imagine, I wonder what's in there. And, it sparks imagination. I don't want to see in there.
Another Hitchcock kind of thing. Don't show everything. You leave it with, and where's Dreyfus going to go? I mean, are you going to have a sequel? He's off in some space, place.
Yeah. I'm glad that never happened.
Yeah.
Well, Joe, listen, I've taken an hour and a quarter of your time here, so I'm very, very grateful to you. And I just want to say, from the bottom of my heart, that these films mean a lot to me, and they mean a lot to a lot of people. And for a lot of people of my generation who are in the industry, I'm in television myself, I think a lot of people have been so inspired by your work. And I know you said earlier that you're amazed that people are still talking about this stuff, but it still matters to people. It's still such a big deal. So I'm so grateful to you for that and for your time as well.
And I appreciate the British Academy Award. It's up in my mantle,
Yeah.
It was a great time. Okay, well, it was nice talking to you.
Thanks, Joe.
Take care.
Appreciate it. Take care. I hope you enjoyed my chat with Joe Alves there. If you didn't already know, Joe went on to direct tons of Jaws second unit, as well as helming Jaws 3D, a film I've not revisited since I was a kid. Thanks to my friend Paddy Tyndall for sending me some clips of it over WhatsApp just before I interviewed Joe to remind me why I haven't watched it again and why I probably shouldn't bring it up with Joe. A huge thanks to my patrons on Patreon. I genuinely couldn't do this without you. If any of you other listeners out there have enjoyed either my podcast or my videos, please consider becoming part of the Filmumentaries family on patreon.com/Jamie Benning. If you've ever thought I'd buy that Jamie bloke a beer or I'd like to talk movies with him over a coffee, then that's really all it will cost to become a Patreon and part of the Filmumentaries family. I've added a new $1 per creation tier recently, and remember, you can set a monthly limit as well. I doubt if I'll ever get more than 3 or 4 things out in one month, but if you want to limit that, you can limit your contribution by setting that monthly limit. And of course, I have released some of my creations without charging patrons as a thank you now and again, and I'll continue to do that. Those that can afford it are the ones helping me to make these podcasts and videos, and you benefit from that too. Thanks to my 2 new patrons that have joined since the start of 2021. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and maybe even leave a nice comment. It all helps. It really, really, really does help. That's how I'm going to get eyes and ears on this podcast, so I do appreciate that. Next episode is already recorded. I just need to edit it. I spoke with director Gavin Rothery. He worked with Duncan Jones on Moon as VFX supervisor and has recently released his directorial feature debut called Archive. Do check that out on various streaming platforms. He really has pulled off an incredible feat despite the small budget. It's a pretty cool film, actually. There's some really good moments in there, and I'm pretty sure if you like the films that I like, then you're going to enjoy it. Gav is a real creative force of nature, and I'm sure you'll enjoy listening to my chat with him next time around. Thanks again for listening, and I'll be back soon for the next episode of the Filmumentaries podcast.